In what comes as a bit of a shock, Gently Mad Studios has announced the closure of their studio just 2 months after Endzone 2 came out of early access. This is basically the end for Endzone 2. What in the world happened? So, I was actually planning to get around to making a video about this game because I think there's something really neat about it. But unfortunately, making this video here, a news commentary about the studio's closure, was actually not part of the plan, but that's where we are at. Endzone 2, the sequel of a promising little post-apocalyptic city builder, was not a popular game, even amongst people that played the first game, Endzone: A World Apart. I suppose primarily because the sequel did feel worlds apart from the first game, pun intended. But before I get to what sets it apart and why people didn't quite like it, let's look at some numbers to give you an idea of how far off the mark Endzone 2 was. The first Endzone wasn't actually a massive game. I think it's got a decent number of players for a small indie studio. This could be a good positive signal. An all-time peak of 6,000 plus players at launch. And oh, mind you, the first game was also available in early access and had a decent number of people playing prior to release as well. They even released 2 DLC expansions, so I'm pretty confident in saying it did well for them. Endzone 2, on the other hand, tells a completely different story. Its all-time peak happened when the game entered early access in September 2024 at 873 players. Endzone 2 was hit with mixed reviews and negative impressions from the very beginning, so the devs were at an advantage from the start. They acknowledged this in their final message, and the launch only managed to get 595 players. That's really sad. This was a disaster of a sequel. So why is no one playing Endzone 2? Well, after a promising first game, the devs decided to go ambitiously big with the sequel. They got the Frostpunk 2 disease of making a sequel that was a different game from the first game. So for the fans of the first Endzone: A World Apart, they really didn't like the new direction, and when you didn't have people playing the game or streaming it or showing it off on a streaming platform and YouTube, no one knew about it or bothered to grab this game. The Steam reviews didn't help much as well. There are a ton of negative reviews for this game. In Endzone: A World Apart, you focus on building this one post-apocalyptic settlement. The cool thing about the game was a dynamic weather system that was realistically simulated, so things like humidity and radiation also changed after a while. In particular, this is tied with farming crops, which is a tad bit more involved. There was some scavenging to be done at points of interest on the map, but it was all rather limited. The core was still very much building your settlement to withstand the radiation and other disasters, which you could see a warning of it in like a timeline indicator. Just like in Frostpunk, this is very much a survival city builder. You will need to prepare for those future challenges. But in Endzone 2, they made the focus on exploring the map. You had this bus, which in the first game was just your initial settlers that created a town center around it. But in Endzone 2, you can send this bus around the map to explore and discover places you can scavenge and even settle new colonies, expanding the scope of the game. I've heard many creators say Endzone 2 is much more like an anno game. Limited resources in your first colony will push you to discover new so-called islands, pockets of colonizable land that bring new opportunities with new terrain types like marshes, You can set up trade routes between your different colonies or settlements. No doubt this is an interesting interpretation of the game, but one that is very different from the first game. Now, I've got to be honest, I was actually starting to like this game a bit before I had learned about the studio closure news, but this obviously is not what fans wanted. Gently Mad Studios isn't a massive studio with a pedigree of making city builders. They are a team of about 24. Their previous games were in between, a platformer with a strong emphasis on narrative, Pizza Connection 3, a tycoon game about managing a pizza store and making them into an empire, and of course the Endzone series. Endzone 2 was very ambitious to the point that it changed the core emphasis of the game. It wasn't the story of how one settlement survived, but how you, the player, expanded and built up this chain of supply that enabled your colonies to thrive. Now, at first I did realize this really wasn't like the first game, and there were elements that were a bit rough, just like minor things like the way your vehicle could just go in a straight line, not following roads and such. But yeah, that's just a minor niggle. The systems in here are quite cool. You can shift a building's work area, so if the resources have finished, just move the work area somewhere else. There's a small penalty you'll pay, but it means the building will still function. The whole sending your vehicle around and doing expeditions where you control one dude moving around the structure and collecting stuff seems cool on paper, but personally, I just prefer it being an automated thing that just happens on its own. This is my least favorite part of the game, which feels like an unnecessary minigame within a city builder. Look, I think I get why some players don't like Endzone 2. They don't appreciate the whole explore the surrounding world and doing stuff outside of your settlement. Taking away the focus or emphasis away from settlement building and management. I mean, those things could actually be okay in a regular city builder, but it's just that I felt Endzone 2 just pushed this boundary a bit too much. There was a lot of stuff to do outside of your settlement, and I can see a rather unfocused core design of the game here compared to the first game, which was a lot more clearer on what it was and what you were supposed to be doing. But still, Endzone 2 was a pretty good game that just failed to excite players. They are old fans and new players alike. And I guess I can also include content creators like myself. There is really not that much content out there for this game. It was probably too slow paced. This is actually a very common complaint even with the first game, and it lacked a proper story since it's more of a sandbox game that lacks a story campaign. Gently Mad Studios is yet another developer that has struggled this year, and it just goes to show you that game development is a very challenging business to get into. If you just don't have a hit, you'll quickly run out of funds. Not forgetting the city builder subgenre is incredibly competitive with many games released as well as many failures, which Endzone 2 now falls into one of those failed city builder games, sadly. Without a team to continue working on patches and such, Endzone 2 is done the way it is. Unless the publisher Assemble Entertainment sells the name, which I doubt has much value for a failed city builder franchise that never really reached its full potential. But for what it's worth, I think Endzone is a pretty cool name. Assemble Entertainment doesn't have a huge game in their catalog of published games. From what I've gathered, a lot of it are small indie games like point and click adventure games or platformers, and at least the latest games that they've published. Endzone's developer Gently Mad Studios is actually like a studio owned by the publisher itself. Like, this founder and CEO of the publisher is also the founder and CEO of that studio, so it's like an in-house studio. And it's clear to me that Assemble is basically saying nope to game development, steering clear from it just to be a publisher. Anyway, I do wish all the devs, artists, and the staff that were affected by the studio closure well and are able to have a quick rebound in their careers. Studio closures and layoffs are always a terrible thing. I hope some of these devs can go on to make perhaps greater things, greater games that might finally be a bigger hit than Endzone. Tell me in the comments, have you played any of the Endzone games and what did you think of them, and what's your thought on Endzone 2? I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on this game. Check out this video of mine where I talk about Stormgate and how, well, I don't think that game and developer will go on for much longer if they continue down this trajectory. Thanks for watching and farewell, noble friends.